I am recording. Yeah, you reminded me to record the meeting. So I am recording it now. And that's to for people to review if they need to, and also for the people in the group who haven't come, I'll send them the link and they'll be able to check out the meeting. Open up the chat section if you haven't already, and feel free to ask any questions in the chat section. And later on, when we take some breaks, we're going to break into a couple of small groups, unless there's more. We might break into 3, but for now, we'll probably do 2 small groups later on. Use that Zoom feature and share some stuff with each other. Lori's here twice now. Awesome. It's like in stereo. Very cool. But put some questions in the chat if you need it, if you need to. And I think that's all I have to say about Zoom. We are going to start out with a little poll today as well. I don't know if you guys have used the poll feature, but we're going to try that this morning as well. So some of the questions that we're going to be talking about today are, what should leaders be doing during this time of crisis? Should they be leading in different ways than they normally do? And if so, how so? How should they be managing their staff? How should they be dealing with their customers? And what style of leadership works best in a time like this? And I found when doing some of the, thinking about it in my own head, we've all probably gone through crisis situations of one sort or another. I'm not sure anyone has quite gone through something like this pandemic before, but I'm sure there have been things in your organization or in your personal life or in the world that has created a crisis for you, and you've had to get through that. So this is another opportunity to learn. And I do see these crises, if you will, as opportunities. And that's all about how you, I guess, view the world. If you look at the world as, always causing you difficulty, causing you problems, it's always negative, that's probably what you'll bring to the workplace. I choose to bring optimism and hope and change when something like this happens. So what do I need to do in this situation to make things better moving forward? And I just keep learning and trying to stay positive through it all. Okay, so we're going to start out with a poll, then I'm going to present some information. Then we'll do some discussion about that information in small groups, bring it back to the large group and have a bit more of a discussion to see what you guys came up with in the small groups, and then do a little bit more sharing of information and then see where that gets us. So that's kind of the agenda for today. Okay, and so first of all, let me ask if there's any questions around that. I'll unmute everybody. Does anybody have any questions around that so far?
Nope.
Okay, good. So I like to propose a little icebreaker. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on a song and I'm going to dance. And I hope that you guys dance too. You can stand up in your chair, you can dance, you can sit in your chair and dance. Just move your body for about 5 minutes. So I'm going to put on a song and be right back.
We're not the only one, Shaylee.
Nancy and I start every class with a song.
And we dance.
And we dance.
One of our favorites is the Get Up. Of course, the young guy stands up. Can't hear it very well. Come on, Shaylee.
Turn up my volume.
I'm going to keep my ears hit. Come on, Rish, dance. dance like no one's watching. Yeah. There's dancing. Hey, baby.
Do the jazz hands.
Oh, that was good.
Good tunes.
That was called Zoot Suit Riot by the Cherry Poppin' Daddies. Good swing tune. Okay, I'm warmed up. All right. Thanks for imbibing in that. All right, let's do this little poll. You should be able to see it.
Oh.
Can only check off one, I think. One more person to vote. There we go. Interesting. Here are the results. Everybody voted the same one. That's pretty amazing. Be flexible and adaptable. All right, cool. Remember that one. And now I'm going to share my screen. And we'll get into this little PowerPoint. All right. Here we go. So crisis leadership, best practices. So again, I'm going to share a bit of information for you from just some of the things that I know, some of the things I've done research on. Okay. And then we'll break into a couple small groups and have a discussion around these. So what I'd like you to do is make note of the points that I bring up. Not all the points, but the main headings in terms of each leadership skill, because I'm going to ask you to talk about those in the small groups, okay? So here's the first one. Excuse me. Educating yourself. I think it's really important in this time to find out as much information as you possibly can about what's going on. In this case, it's the pandemic. So if you listen to some of the leaders in the world and hear how they speak, about what's going on, how much information they'd have, you kind of have to laugh in a sad way, because they don't seem to have a lot of information. They don't seem to gather information from a lot of different sources, and then they make decisions based on that limited information. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to some of us, but it's done. And I think it's really, really important when there's a crisis to find out as much as you can from as many places as you possibly can. So if you only go to Fox News, if that's your go-to, then go to Fox News, but try something else so you can get a different perspective. And the same if you're only a CNN person, you know, or a CBC person, find somewhere else to get your information from so that you can have that balanced perspective. It's really, really important. The worst thing is to rely on gossip. So a situation came up this morning. You know, I mentioned to some of you who were here at the beginning, I live in High River, Alberta, 30 minutes south of Calgary. We're now a hot spot in Alberta for the COVID virus because of our meat packing plant. Around 1,000 people in the community out of 15,000 have tested positive. And it's a concern. But there's all kinds of gossip going around about, you know, how this thing got started in the meatpacking plant, what a terrible organization Cargill, that's the name of the meatpacking plant, is because of the fact that people got infected, and on and on and on it goes without the facts. It's just this gossip that spreads. Even gossip around a lot of the people who work at Cargill are Mexican and Filipino. And so gossip around, you know, those races as, you know, causing this pandemic in High River. It's absolutely insane. It's ridiculous. It's just gossip. And that kind of information is what will kill an organization instead of getting the facts, the real facts. And we all know, of course, that information is power. The more information you have, the more power you have to make a decision that's going to be the most helpful for your organization. Next one. Well, you all voted for this one, and obviously it's an important one for you. And I think, you know, in university, I did a master's degree project on organizations as living organisms. And when I went to university and did that project, it was back in the 1800s. It was quite a while ago, but I still think it applies today. Because an organization is not a static thing. And even though things are maybe going well in your organization for a certain period of time, if you're not flexible and you're not willing to adapt, then what happens when a crisis like this occurs? You don't know what the heck to do because you haven't had that experience. So that intention, that thought process about being ready for anything that can come down the pike, whether it's a pandemic like this or something that goes on where you lose some of your best people for whatever reason, or there's a fire in your building, or whatever the situation is, that you have this kind of skill and willingness to just move with the flow and do something different to deal with the situation. It's so huge. It helps you make clear decisions. When you're willing to be flexible and adaptable. And there's nothing wrong with making a decision for a moment in time and then having to change it because things change. This pandemic is a perfect example of that. So you're seeing, for example, you know, in our government, decisions around or thoughts around reopening now for, you know, the economy, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that. But there's different ways of how people are looking at reopening. And so some, you know, one province might reopen in a certain way based on what they think their information is from what they've gathered, which is fine. They make that decision. And then if it doesn't work, be ready to adapt and be flexible and make another decision. And I think that's perfectly okay. Us humans, you know, seem to want to know what the future is going to be so we can plan for it. It's, how do you do that in a case like this? It's just, it's almost impossible. So while it's reassuring to give people some information that they can rely on and ground themselves on, they also have to be aware that we don't really know what's going on and be honest about that, which is another huge thing about leadership, is to be open and honest. We'll talk more about that. Just another example of being flexible and adaptable. So I have a buddy who owns 2 really high-class restaurants in Calgary. And when this whole thing happened, he, of course, had to shut down like everybody else did. And he was really worried about that because he takes care of a lot of people. not just himself, but he takes care of a lot of people in terms of his employees and their families. And so he shut down because he thought that was the best for the larger picture. And now as things have gone along and other people have decided to open up for takeout and delivery, he's doing the same thing. So he's adapted to the situation. And so they're only doing takeout and delivery. And that seems to be working. And he's got some of his people working and he's doing some work. And that's okay. And if something else comes along and he'll be able to maybe open one of his restaurants or however that works, he will do that. But he's a perfect example of a leader who's looking, always looking every day, saying, okay, what can I do today to help my people? Because that's what he's there for. He knows that his success is only because of his people. All right, the next one. Prioritizing. It's a tough one. Sometimes you have to look at making decisions in the moment that will deal with what's going on in the short term, but also look at what the possible long-term outcomes are. So it's not an easy thing for leaders to do. But again, if you're flexible and adaptable, you can make a decision today and you can change that decision in 3 days because you feel you have to. And there's nothing wrong with that. But remember when you're prioritizing, what are you prioritizing for? What comes first? I mean, you have to think of your people, obviously. You have to think of yourself and your family. You have to think of your business in the long term. We're going to lose a lot of businesses, unfortunately, during this because of this pandemic. But others might actually emerge and open up because of it too as well. So you have to weigh all that in. And I make lists, what are the most important things on my list to do? And then I do those. And if I have time, I do the others. And the list just keeps changing. It's just kind of the way I run my life. And your customers, of course, you have to think of your customers. So my friend, the restaurateur, is thinking of his customers. He knows that, as long as he's serving and visible, that customers will still be loyal to him because they like his food anyway. But if he shut down for a whole year and you never heard about him, it's quite easy for those customers to drift somewhere else. A lot of people who are shopping retail, for example, are now shopping online. Who knows if those customers will ever go back to those retail stores? And what are those retail stores, businesses doing to maintain their customers? Are they even keeping in contact with them? Do they even have the capability of doing that? So it's really important to think about customers, staff, yourself, your business, and what the priorities are around those. Got to build a clear plan. Got to build a clear plan. And again, I personally don't have any problems with the plans changing, but as long as there's some clarity and people know what the expectation is now and they can act on the plan, then that's great. And if you have to change the plan in a week, you change the plan in a week. Hard times call for hard decisions and sometimes difficult things to deal with, but you have to deal with them. You can't hide if you're a leader. There needs to be some kind of a game plan that you have. I spend a lot of time listening to American politics. And the reason I listen to American politics is because I think they have a huge impact on Canada. And of course, the huge part of American politics is the president. And I have a hard time with the president in terms of his planning. He doesn't seem to have plans. And this isn't a political statement. I don't care if you are for Trump or against him, but I don't see a clear plan that he has, and he seems to change his mind based on what he might have heard from one source. And so I have a problem with that kind of leadership. I think that as leaders in organizations, we really have to steer a direction. And by the way, not by ourselves. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. We have to include all of our people in developing this plan because they're a huge part of it. And we don't have to make all the decisions ourselves. And strategic thinking, of course, is really important here in planning. We have to look at, different possible scenarios. So we may have 3 or 4 different scenarios, and we think, just like the medical folks are, planning on using all these models to determine what will happen with the pandemic, and basing decisions and reopening or not reopening on those models. How accurate those models are, I don't really know, but that's what they're using, and they probably have a variety of different scenarios in place depending on what happens with, if there is an outbreak, where the outbreak is, how the outbreak happens, and then they might change the model, change the plan. And that's just the way it is, and that's totally okay. Next one is leveraging your team. So I kind of alluded to this. By the way, having fun at work can still happen in any kind of a time. It doesn't have to be just good times to have fun at work. In fact, during these times, it's sometimes better to try and infuse some humor or fun at work if you can. So in terms of leveraging your team, you know, I think we have to really keep in touch with them and ask them how they're doing constantly. How are they doing? And we have to engage them in the process. And some leaders have a difficult time doing that. They like to make decisions on their own, or maybe they have a senior management team that makes the decisions, and everybody else just kind of follows along. I think that's not the way to go. I think you have to incorporate all kinds of opinions from all kinds of your people and your customers. What do they think you should do? And then make the decisions based on all that information that you gather. You don't have to do this alone. I'm on a men's team, and we call men who do things on their own lone wolves. These are men who are too proud to ask for help, and they don't show their vulnerability. And I think we all know what happens with men or women who do that. It can lead you into trouble, and there's no reason for it. There's help available to you. And in fact, your team probably wants to be more involved in a situation like this. So they have, first of all, they'll have more information when you're informing them about what's going on, and when you're asking them for their input, that makes them feel good. And that might be the difference in actually keeping them with you once this thing is over. So it's really important to empower your team. You don't have to be the superhero, right? And also when you give your members of your team responsibility, they usually rise to the occasion. At least that's my experience. So leveraging your team, another important point. This is huge as well. And I have to say this, I have to make this gender statement because I happen to be agender, and I think women do this way better than men. Men, at least in my experience from organizational leaders that are men, their communication tends to be insular. It's not constant. It doesn't expand to a whole lot of different people. It's that small circle of people that they rely on. And I think this is not the time to do that. This is the time to communicate as much as you possibly can. That's why I love the 9:15 check-ins with the Prime Minister every day. I listen to those almost every day. That communication to me is really, really important. It tells me what the government is thinking, where they're planning to go. When they have services that I could latch onto, then I get to hear about that, and I get to apply for a grant or apply for a loan or apply for whatever. So it's really important communication for me, and I really, really like that. Without that, all we would be hearing is from news media, and again, which are accurate, which are not so accurate, who do you believe? So I like hearing it from the horse's mouth. Your staff like hearing it from the horse's mouth too. Otherwise, gossip can spread. If you're not communicating what's going on, people will be wondering, and then gossip will start to spread, and then who knows where that will lead, right? I think the communication has to be open and transparent. I believe in just laying it all on the table. This is what's going on, folks, and this is what could happen. Some people think that's putting fear into your staff. I think it's just telling them how it is. I think my experience is people can deal with the truth, and they don't want false hope. I don't want to be told everything's going to be okay, because I don't know that everything's going to be okay. I just want to know what's going on now, what's happening now. So that's things like, how many are sick? Well, can we reopen? If we reopen, how will we reopen? What do we need to do? What are the health people saying that we need to do? What's the government saying that we need to do? These are the facts. These are the facts. How do we integrate them into our particular organization, our particular business, and make it work for us and our customers and our staff? That's really all you have to do. Some businesses will have to lay people off. Some businesses will have to fire people. Some businesses will have to shut down. That's a reality. And I don't think we need to hide that from people. I think we need to be open with them, because if your business is going to shut down, tell your people so that they can make plans to find work elsewhere. Why would they want to hear it, on the day of? Oh, by the way, we have to shut down. I'm sorry, got to go. That's not helping them. So I think that leaders need to be much more open and transparent than they already are being. Assuming, of course, and this is, again, it's from my experience working with organizations as a consultant and some of the leaders that I come across. Not all leaders are like that, of course. Generally speaking, though, I think leaders can communicate more frequently, more openly, more honestly with their people. And I think the communication needs to be positive. Even if the business is shutting down, that could be a positive thing for some people. Some people actually hate their jobs. They may hate working for you, depending what your business is. And the fact that the business is closing down might force them now to do something different with their life. There's some career development people here in the room, and those career development people know that that could be the thing that changes their whole life. Oh my God, I can't do this anymore because my business shut down, but look at the opportunities that now await me. One door closes, 100 others open. So what you think is bad news might eventually actually help that person and change their life for the better in a way that you never thought of before. And again, in that communication piece, the vulnerability, I think, is really, really important. You got to, if you don't know, you don't know. Why pretend that you know something you don't know or have the answer that you don't have? It's okay to be human as a leader. Leaders are human. I was talking to one of my clients. He's a McDonald's owner, and he owns 11 restaurants. And I said, so how did you get to be a McDonald's owner? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, what were your qualifications? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you have to have money, right? He said, yeah, I had to buy the franchise. I said, what else? He said, nothing. So here's a guy who owns 11 restaurants, great guy, by the way, and turning into be a really good leader. But he didn't have those. He didn't go to leadership school. He didn't have any of those qualifications when he bought the restaurants. He just had the money. But so now he's Mr. McDonald's for 750 people and their families. But he doesn't necessarily know anything about leadership. But to his tribute, he wants to learn everything he can about being a good leader. So there are leaders in our organizations that get there. We all know how they get there. Sometimes they just kind of get there. They don't, I remember doing some training with the fire department, the senior staff of the fire department, and some of these senior leaders were really worried because yesterday they were, in the field with their buddies who they were now supervising and leading as a senior leader because they got promoted today from yesterday. No training. They're just now a team leader. What do I do now? So they have to sort of learn this stuff. Next one, creating connections. Also, I think very, very important. And those connections are not only with staff and customers, but they're with the people that provide you with materials, the people that you do business with as an organization. They could be other organizations that are doing similar things than you. So all the people that sort of are in your work world, it's really important to maintain connections during this time because we don't know what those connections are going to lead to, and we don't know what's going to happen when the pandemic is over or the reopening starts, and we can move into a different way of being. So connections, I think, are really, really important. Technology is a huge part of that. So, one of the folks in this meeting was talking about that this morning, learning more about Zoom technology, for example. If an organization doesn't have this kind of technology to connect all their people, I highly recommend learning how to do it and getting it done, because you have to have a way to communicate with everybody like on Zoom. And there are other things besides Zoom. It's not just Zoom, but Zoom happens to be a pretty good one, I think. And you have to be available. When people have questions for you, you have to be available as a leader to answer those questions for your customers as well. I bought a new computer, a secondhand refurbished Mac, And it's had a couple little, it just got like a week ago, it's had a couple little things. So I've been writing the company that sold the computer to me. And I keep getting back this like format answer. Like it's not even a person that I'm dealing with, it seems. And it drives me crazy, you know, because you're spending good money on a computer. They're not staying connected with me in a good way. And I have the option to return the computer, and I might just do that. I have 20 days left to make that decision. But my God, all I have to do is have a human being answer the notes, but they're not. If this isn't clear, it should be. If you're not being authentic, change. There's no reason that you need to be somebody else than who you are. Who you are is who you are. And if as a leader that changes somehow because you think you need to be somebody else in order to be a better leader, it's probably not going to work for you because people will see through that. So authenticity, again, the vulnerability is a huge part of that. If you don't know, if you don't know, if you're scared, say so. I don't know what's going to happen, folks. I'm just as scared as you are. But I'm going to stay positive through this, and we're going to work through this together and get through it. Don't hide the bad news. I think that's also really important. And the last one of these for now is managing yourself. And that's huge. I hope you're all taking good care of yourself during this time. We all have to adjust somehow, and some of you may have, you know, kids at home now if they're not being able to go to school, and maybe you and your partner are working together at home, and that's something unusual for you, and you have to adjust to that. So there are all kinds of new things that are happening as a result of this. Maybe one of you have lost your job, or somebody in your family has. Maybe somebody has contacted the disease, and you're not sure where that's going to go. So all of these different things can have an impact on you, and it's really, really important to take care of yourself. So personally, you know, I've developed a bit of a routine here. I mean, I'm self-employed, so working from home is not unusual for me, and my wife works from home as well, so that's okay. We get along really well together. But during this time, we dance together every morning for a half hour or whatever. We go for walks together. We make sure that we communicate. We get frustrated because we're frustrated sometimes because we're human beings. And when we get frustrated, we share those frustrations with each other, and then we talk it out, communicate. That communication is really important. I exercise, make sure that I take care of my body. We eat well, we eat really well. And all those things will just help me get through this a lot better. When life is back to normal, whatever. This may be my new normal. I may just be doing training online now because I don't know, when training face-to-face is going to happen again. It may not happen for months, or speaking at conferences. Who knows when we're going to have large conferences again? It may not happen for a long time. So this could be my new normal. And if that's the case, that's the case. I'm totally okay with that. And I'll make sure to take care of myself in this realm. So I'm hoping that you're doing that for yourself as well. Okay, I'm going to come back out of the share. Whoops. Okay. So now, what I'd like to do is put you into small groups. Let me just see here. I'm going to put you into a couple of breakout rooms. So how about two? We're going to go 2 rooms. And let's see. So we're going to go just put you into a room here. So we're going to go maybe for 15 minutes. And what I'd like you to do in these breakout rooms is the practices that I mentioned. I think there were 9 or 10 of them. Just talk about which ones that you feel that you actually do well, and then which ones that you might need some help with. So maybe one of them you don't think you do as well as you could. And then between the two or three of you, there's three in one room, two in another, have a discussion around what you think you can do to change that. So I'm going to give you about 15 minutes, see if that's enough time, and then we'll come back and share. So here we go. Have fun. Hey, Mikal,
Hello,
how are you?
I am well. It's a busier morning than I like, so apologies for joining late.
That's okay. I've got the folks in a couple of breakout rooms. Should I send you to one of them? And they just got there a few minutes ago.
How much longer are they going to be in those?
About 10
breakouts?
minutes, 10, 12 minutes. They've only been there a few minutes.
Sure.
Okay. Sending you to
Thanks.
room number 2.
Thank you.
It was slide number 7. It was the creating connections and staying connected with other organizations and our colleagues and just family even and neighbors, right?
Yes, because we should expand our connection with other people to find new people and learn something new from them.
Absolutely. Or share what we're doing right. Like for what we do here. So Nancy that's on is a colleague of mine. That's actually her little minion behind me. That's her office.
Okay.
really comes to the fore for me, maybe a close second after flexibility, would be authenticity, being authentic, being ourselves. And I was having a conversation with a group of people yesterday, and we were talking about how this change, where suddenly we're interacting with our teams in different ways, perhaps the initial couple of weeks were really quite unsettling for a lot of people, not knowing what the whole crisis means, how to look after the health and protection, how to go shopping, all those kinds of things, like basic, protecting the family kind of thing. But also, what does it mean for business? What does it mean for relating to one another in terms of work? And based on what I see anecdotally, teams have moved beyond that now quite a bit, have settled in a certain way of connecting, relating, supporting, and working and being productive. And somebody in a different conversation yesterday was saying how it's fascinating to see that the work still gets done, and people are getting more, people attend more to their family business. They spend more time with children, they cook meals together. So things tend to be more relaxed, not in every single household every single day, but there's a certain sense of kind of, this is working, it's okay. We're not overly stressed about it. And so now I think, to me, the question is, how do we then
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I missed you. And so glad that Edison and Mikhail got to be in there. That's awesome. So what came out of that? What did you learn? What do you want to share with the larger group?
Do you want me to go? I'll go first.
Sure.
We had a great discussion. We really did some focus on managing ourselves and knowing that we need to take a break and knowing that we need to be reflective of our time. So my example was, I can sit in my home office for 3-4 hours and not realize what time it is or that the day's going by, right? So that self-care. And then we also talked about the opportunities, about transferable skills and looking at things from a bigger perspective, not just from the box that, we kind of keep ourselves in. And then the other thing that we ended on, which I thought was really, really interesting, was looking at resistance to change. And so that's just kind of a common thing we do. And Edison had really touched on that, about developing good human beings. And so learning something new every day, doing one thing every day that's different, and that the change is going to come from the person we see in the mirror, and that's how it's going to start. And that really resonated with me, and I think our group, and it's part of that reset and changing cultures, that we have an opportunity here. So how are we going to utilize those great things that we have the opportunity to do right now? So I really enjoyed the conversation in our group, and it was interesting because I had said yesterday I was in a very long council meeting with some very heated discussions, and I'm not a good politician. I actually suck at it, but I believe we're only as strong as our weakest link, and we shouldn't have any weak links, no matter where we're at. And then that I got involved was there was voices that weren't being heard. And so I think we have to lift everybody up. And I think that developing good human beings is exactly that opportunity for us right now to be inclusive of all cultures, whatever that culture description may be. And that it's personal growth that ties into that management of ourselves. So that was our conversation in a nutshell. If I missed anything, gentlemen, please say so.
Sounds like a great summary to me.
We talked about the being authentic and how if you weren't authentic before, working from home was going to be more difficult for you.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
well, you know, and we talked about that and how that might be your weak thing, if that could be a weakness. The communication, we also talked about how much is too much communication, and our meetings every day at 8:30 for an hour, really what's needed, or to fit everybody's work plan and how everybody works differently and likes to do things at different times during the day. And if we're having this yap on in the morning, it might be too much. And so we talked about adapting our communication so that it was open, transparent, and so that people could come to you or could see the plan. You know, I talked about having a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet so you could see what the benchmarks were or whatever, but just letting people get there and come together as needed for the individual. So,
very cool.
And recognizing, and that's kind of what we did. We talked about. What else did we talk about there, Louisa?
Anybody else want to chime in?
We talked about how it'll be exciting to see how things will end up. That probably there will be so many lessons learned from this current situation that ultimately when there is a return to the office environment, it will not be a full return. That there will be more flexibility to stay at home when doing an individual task like writing a report, that there isn't the necessity to return to full-time office environments even once everything is back under control. And this will be the lesson to allow for that sort of flexibility in a hybrid model in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, who knows how much money can be saved by organizations by doing that, and what that might mean to people who, you know, for example, me, I put on about 60,000 clicks on my car every year. I'm not driving at all right now. I'm going to save a ton of money. Anybody else want to chime in? We're good? Okay, so one of the things that I want to encourage you to do, I mean, going through training like this is useless unless you actually do something with it. So it sounds like I'm just going to mute you all here for a second. It sounds like you had some good conversations and talked about some of the things that either you think people need to do to make themselves better people, better human beings, and also therefore better leaders. So I'm going to challenge you to take on one of those things. What are you going to do different starting tomorrow that's going to make you a better human being and a better leader? Otherwise, what's the point of wasting the hour and a half here? So I always want to challenge people to do something different. Expand your comfort zone. Pick one of those things or two of those things, depending on what you came up with. One of those areas that you feel you need to develop, or one that you just want to get better at, and do it. That's what this leadership training is all about. It's only extraordinary if you make it so by making it happen. If you choose to leave here today and go back to doing the same old, well, guess what? You'll go to another training session next week and the same thing will happen. So I'm challenging you. That's what I do. I'm going to push you to be better tomorrow than you are today. So I'm going to go back to the slides here for a second. I'm going to show you a little video. Just a different, well, not maybe necessarily different, but another perspective perhaps on communication. Hmm. You guys aren't hearing that? Wow.
She
Wow.
looked very passionate about what she was saying, though.
Because it was really loud here, so I'm wondering what that was.
I started thinking you did that by design.
Yeah, this is a test.
No,
Yeah,
I
what did
didn't
she
do that.
say?
Yeah, well, you'll have to listen to the recording now. But it was really loud here, so I'm surprised why you couldn't hear it. I'm not sure what that was all about.
And Herky, in combination with not being able to unmute ourselves to tell you.
I saw Edison waving his hand, and I saw him pointing up, and a few others, and so I turned the volume up here, and it was like quite loud, much louder than I'm speaking now. So
I think we were able to. You were not speaking, but we were able to hear what was happening in your room. Like there was a little bit of kind of shuffling. We probably would have been able to hear you, just not the video.
Huh. Okay, I'll have to figure out what the heck's going on there. I have no idea. Anyway, there were a few other things that I was going to talk about, but we're getting fairly late in terms of the time here. So I just want to kind of summarize a couple of slides I was going to show you were what's going on the court in terms of the global situation with respect to this pandemic. So if you're not aware of this, and I'm sure many of you are, you seem to be well-educated folks, is that most of the leaders in the world that are getting this pandemic thing right are women. It's just the way it is. So I had some slides, and I'm just going to go through them a little bit here. So, for example, Angela Merkel of Germany, this article that I read about these women gave them a leadership quality that they attached. So one was truth. For Angela, it was truth. What she did is she was very open about how serious this was in her country. And the testing began immediately. And as a result of being open, honest, and this testing right away, the numbers in Germany are far below any of the other European countries. I'm not sure if it's president or prime minister of Taiwan, and I can't pronounce her name very well. Tsang Ing-wen, that's the best I can do. But they gave her the quality of decisiveness. As at the first sign of illness, she introduced 124 measures to block the spread and hasn't had to resort to lockdown measures whatsoever in Taiwan, and one of the lowest death totals in the world as a result of her decisiveness and her action. Jacinda Ardern, I'm sure many of you have heard of, from New Zealand, also decisiveness. Her early lockdown and clear communication as to why this was going on was really, really important. Imposed self-isolation very early on in the pandemic. And as a result, they only had 4 deaths in New Zealand as of mid-April. And I just heard this morning that she is still continuing to have self-isolation, and when they reopen, she's going to be sure that it's the best thing for them to do. And I just really like her decisiveness. It was just amazing. Another one is Katrin, and I can't pronounce her last name. She's president of Iceland. And in Iceland, they used incredible technology. They had free testing for every citizen in Iceland. They screened 5 times more people than South Korea. And they developed a sophisticated tracking device so they know exactly where people are going who have the virus and who don't have the virus and where they're hanging out. It's kind of a big brother thing, but it's also helping in terms of having stopping the spread of the virus in Iceland. And as a result of what she's been doing, they're going to become a case study to follow later on as people with the virus are moving through the community and seeing what happens. And then the last one is Erna Solberg from Norway, and the quality they gave to her was love. And what she's been doing, and actually Prime Minister Trudeau has been following suit. So if you listen to his daily things, sometimes at the end of it on the weekend, he talks specifically to kids. He says, I want to talk to all the children out there. Well, she started doing this in Norway and spent doing a whole press conference just for kids. She didn't want any adults around. She just wanted kids there. And she just expressed her love for kids and gave them the permission to be afraid and ask questions and talk to their parents and not to worry. And just a cool thing to do for a leader. So that's all I want to share with you. Again, I want to challenge you to take some steps and do something tomorrow that'll be different for you in this time, in whatever workplace that you're in right now, whether you're working from home or you're working at the office. So as a person, as a human being, and as a leader. And I'm going to end there. And if there's any final questions or comments, I'm going to unmute you and feel free to go at it.
Thanks for organizing Herky. Edison here. You know, for me, when this first started, I think my general practice is to kind of reach out to 10 or more people a day, just to check in with people, because during times of crises or change, stressful situations, you never know how people are dealing with it. And so I find that it helps for people to know that somebody's actually thinking of them. And so, you know, certain days I actually do 20 or even more. And so that's kind of how I'm trying to just to lead during this time. But also, another thing, if I could ask you, what is your vision with this meetup?
So my vision is to continue these kinds of trainings based, and I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think you were in yet, Edison. I've asked the question as people were RSVPing as to what kinds of things they wanted to see training on. So I'm going to start pinpointing those and continuing doing the training. I'm going to start charging for them, and we're going to lose some people for that. I get that, but that's how I make my living. And that's my vision, is to develop extraordinary leaders. And I'm open to any feedback from any of you around that.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you all for coming again. Really appreciate it. You'll be hearing about the next training through the message system on Meetup, and I wish you all a fantastic day and be great leaders and great human beings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much, Herky.
Thank you. Have a great
Thank
day,
you all.
everyone.
You too.
Have a great day.
Fun.
Bye-bye.